Hey, what's up, everybody? Aaron D here, the original Fantasy Football Addict website, www.fantasyfootballaddict.com. What are we doing here today? Well, I want to talk a little bit about fantasy football, advanced draft techniques. You see it on the screen right there. What we're talking about is developing a draft strategy and executing on that draft strategy. Whether, who's my audience right now? Who am I talking to? I'm talking to everybody. Are you new to fantasy football? This is going to be huge for you. Have you been playing for the last few years? This is still going to be huge for you. Have you been doing it for 15 years and you consider yourself a draft expert? This is still going to be big for you. Because if you're like me and I've been doing it for a long time, any edge that I can get on my competition, I want that edge. So, uh, developing a draft strategy and executing on that strategy is very important. Why is it important? Well, we're talking about football, right? These teams don't go out there and just wing it on game day, right? They practice all week long, developing very specific plays and game plans for each opponent. They don't just wing it, all right? And the same goes for you and your drafting. You shouldn't just wing it. So how do most people draft? Well, traditionally, a lot of us were, using highlighter pen and printouts, or a draft magazine and a highlighter pen. A lot of people these days are doing online drafts, so they're just relying on the rankings that are in the draft room for whatever website, be it ESPN or NFL.com, whichever website you're using, RT Sports. So I sort of, for myself, I've personally developed my own tool, my own draft tool and preparation guide to use personally for my own fantasy football leagues. And a few years back, I started offering it to other people. And so if I could help others to use my strategy, I wanted to do that. So now we're going to look at my spreadsheet just so you have an idea of what we're talking about. So with a spreadsheet, obviously we want to use a laptop during our draft or a desktop computer. Will it work on a tablet? Sure. I don't think it's as ideal of a situation, so I prefer to use a laptop. So just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the spreadsheet. You see here we have the columns. Here's our running backs, our wide receivers, tight end. If you scroll down, see it's a pretty deep list. Over on our left, we have down below, you see all the bye weeks for the different teams. But for each player, you see that I already have the bye week right there. For wide receivers, I even put in what they are classified as far as what wide receiver they are on their team. So, for example, Doug Baldwin's the number one wide receiver on his team. Went down a little too far there. Deshaun Jackson's the number two guy on his team, Tampa Bay. Martavis Bryant, the number two guy on Pittsburgh. You'll notice that I have some players that are highlighted in purple, and they're underlined, and they're sort of italicized. That is me indicating players that I think have high upside. There's just something about them that I like, and I think they're undervalued. And so I sort of just wanted a way to identify these guys and let them stick out to me. If I get some of these players, and they're especially down in the later, rounds, I want to try to identify some of these guys that have that high upside, low risk, high reward kind of a guy. And here's how it works. This is the basic idea of how the draft guide works. On draft day, whoever picks first, let's say it's not me, and that person picks David Johnson, I highlight that player in red. The next person up the draft takes Le'Veon Bell, boom, they're red. Let's say I'm picking third in this hypothetical. I take Antonio Brown. I highlight him in yellow. And that's how it's going to proceed. Everybody else that gets taken, I'm highlighting in red. Everybody that I'm taking, I'm highlighting in yellow. And how does this help? Well, you're going to very clearly, especially there's a lot of people who say to me, you know what, I always screw up. I always get players that have the same bye weeks. So I'm always screwed for my bye weeks. This makes it very easy to identify. Let's say I end up getting DeAndre Hopkins, boom. Well, I know two of my guys don't have the same bye week, bye 7, bye 9, so that's great. If I end up getting somebody like Crabtree, great. Now all three of my wide receivers don't have the same bye week. I'm in a pretty good shape there. So that's the basics. That would be the basic way to use the spreadsheet. And just so you see over here, the draft strategy, how does that work? That has a drop down box. So for example, this is not necessarily telling me I want to pick these guys in this specific order. This is just for me to track who I've taken. So let's say I do take a running back with, or let's say I take, Antonio Brown as I did in that one. Boom, I took my wide receiver 1. So next, I either want to take my wide receiver 2 or maybe my running back 1. Let's just assume I ended up taking my running back 1. So I would just change this out to RB1 and change this out to wide receiver 2. That's how the draft strategy works. That's the very basics. And this is going to help you, especially in the later rounds, because there's so many people, and some of you are probably like this. I know I used to be like this. After around the 7th, 8th round, you start to be like, losing interest, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to take here. Do I take another wide receiver? Do I take another running back? So many people end up taking a kicker earlier than they should, or a defense earlier than they should. My draft strategy is really about trying to avoid, failing during the second half of your draft. It's all about having a deep draft. And let's go back to just my document. Why do we want to do this? We want to have a more consistent and deep draft experience. You want to be more prepared than your competition, and that's going to give you an edge in your draft. And you want to have, if you have a better draft, what's that mean? It means you have a better chance at winning a championship. Obviously, there's more than just having a great draft that goes into winning a championship, right? You're going to have a lot of luck. Your players, your high draft picks aren't going to get injured. There's always injuries each year. You're going to have to make some good adds and drops, right, in free agency, waiver wire. Just last year, who did we see? Jordan Howard, for example. Nobody drafted Jordan Howard in fantasy leagues last year, but if you picked him up, it probably helped you, get pretty darn close to getting a championship. Ty Montgomery, another guy nobody drafted last year, ended up being a really good running back. So is a draft important? Absolutely. But, having a good draft is going to set you up to have a better opportunity to win your league. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is something that I'm introducing for the first time this year. I've developed the draft position keystone, and this is really taking drafting to the next level. It's going to enable you to be more prepared than anybody else in your league. Okay, it's going to set you up for success. And here is the idea. We're going to head over here to the draft position keystone. Actually, before I do that, I don't know if I showed you guys the top 150 tab yet, just in case you're not familiar with this. This is really for pre-draft, like the week before or something. You want to read a little bit of how I feel about certain players. You can read this again. There's 150 players in here. So you scroll down, you can see it's a pretty deep thing. You don't want to use this to draft specifically. But as you're doing your research, for example, each one of these players is a hyperlink. So if I click on Le'Veon Bell, it's going to open up. Here it is. It's going to open up Roto World. It's going to show me, and for anybody who doesn't know Roto World, great fantasy football website. I use it for all of my research. So, you want to see the recent news on Le'Veon Bell. Did he get hurt recently? What's going on with his regular season holdout? Is it going to happen or not? This is where you want to come to see the different news. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll get to see his stats for the 4 years that he's been in the league. So if we just look at last year, 12 games he played in because he was suspended, 261 rush attempts. He had over 1,200 yards rushing. 6 games where he had 100+ rushing yards. That's pretty cool. 7 touchdowns. Not as good as we would have wanted. for PPR purposes, 75 catches. That's huge, which is additional 616 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. So again, this is just for doing your research. So again, the guide is not just for what you're going to do on draft day. It's for doing a lot of research. There's a lot of other tabs with instructions and how to use the guide. But this main tab that I just created that's going to help everybody, it's called the Draft Position Keystone. And you're going to look at it and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at. And that's okay. You're going to know in a little bit. So the first thing you want to know is, am I in a 10-team league? Or am I in a 12-team league? Or am I in an 8-team league? 10-team league, obviously being the most popular. 12-team, second most popular. So once you know that, here's the other important thing we want to know. What pick do you have in the first round? Some of you are going to know this weeks in advance of your draft. Some of you aren't going to know until the day of your draft, like an hour before. Some of you aren't going to know for maybe 5 minutes before the draft. But whatever it is, as soon as you know what pick you have in the draft, that's when we can start to develop our draft strategy. All right, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm just going to randomly say, okay, I'm in a 10-team league, and for purposes of this demonstration, I have the 5th pick in the draft. So I'm just going to highlight it in yellow so you see. So what do these numbers mean here? This is how I'm going to develop my strategy. That's what this means. So round 1, I need to have 5 players picked out. 5 of my favorite players, because I'm going to get one of those 5 players, right? Because 4 other players are going to go off the board, and I have the 5th pick. So with the color blue, I'm going to go over here to the draft guide tab, and I'm going to pick my 5 favorite players. Let me just say for shits and giggles that it's these 3 running backs and these 2 wide receivers. That is my draft strategy for the first round. I'm going to get one of these 5 guys. I'm not waiting until it's my turn to say, okay, who's left? Who do I want? I already know I want one of these 5 guys. So we go back to the draft position keystone. And now we say, all right, what do I need to know for the second round? Second round, 11. What does that mean? Well, it means there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I need to pick 11 players that I like now so that I can get one of those 11 players. So I go back to my thing, to the draft guide tab. So let me say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I like these 6 running backs. So now I'm going to just do these in green. And if you look on the position keystone, I already say here, hey, use green. So there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I like those 6 running backs, and I said 11. So I want 1, 2, 3, 4. I like these 4 wide receivers, and let's say I also like Gronk. So there's my 11th guy. Boom. Round 1. Blue. Boom. Round 2. Green, just to keep me understanding what I'm doing here. Round 1, round 2. We go back to the keystone. Round 3, which I've highlighted in a gold color. 9, right? Because it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is a snake draft like all drafts. That's why we want to have 9 players ready for that third round. So maybe I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about a quarterback, because if one of these quarterbacks is there, I wouldn't mind having them. So I'm using my gold or orange, gold or orange, whatever the color that is. I like those 3 quarterbacks. I like these 3 running backs. And again, we're talking about 9 players. So there's 6. Let's say I like these 2 wide receivers, 7, 8, and 9 for Kelce. So now I've already created my strategy, and I'm good. I'm good at this point. I'm just sort of vision mapping out my first 3 rounds so that, let's go ahead and execute it, right? I'm at the number 5 pick. So let's do it. Pick 1. Let's say the person takes David Johnson. Pick 2. That person takes Le'Veon Bell. Pick 3. That person takes Antonio Brown. Pick 4. That person takes Odell Beckham. Boom. So there it is. I already know. It's easy. I don't even have to think about it. My guy is Ezekiel Elliott. Yellow. I've drafted him. And then the other people have drafted these guys, so they're red now. So we keep on going, right? Because this is a 10-team league. So there's 5 more picks in round 1. So let's just, keep going with that. Let's say the next guy takes McCoy, that guy takes Freeman, that guy takes, or girl, takes DeMarco Murray, this person takes Julio Jones, this person takes Jordy Nelson. So that's the end of round 1. Now we are in the loop back of round 2, right? So there's going to be 5 more people that take, 5 more players that get taken before it gets back to you. So we go back to the draft guide. Let's say the next guy takes, this guy takes Gronk. This guy takes AJ Green. Then this person takes Gordon. Next person takes Howard. Next person takes Gurley. Okay? So now you're at your pick. And 2 of the guys you've identified for round 2 are available. So now it's like, what do I do, right? Because I have more options than I thought, right? So in this case, you might say, well, I've already got a running back, so I want to get my number 1 wide receiver. I agree with that. So I would go ahead and take my wide receiver there. So what we did in our draft strategy is we took RB1 and we took wide receiver 1. So I'm going to highlight those now in yellow. They're done. They're over. So there you go. Those are the first 2 rounds. And then it just keeps on going like that. So now that, we're done with this round, right? We have already had the second pick, and we've got these. I already have my next 9 players identified. I can even start at this point thinking about the next 11 players that I want to have, and I can go back to using the color blue now. So as you can see, blues are already gone. So now I can say, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that I want to identify for that 4th round. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and these 6 wide receivers. So these are the guys, the guys that I'm thinking about for round 4. So that's easy. This is going to help you to really just not have to rely on taking it round by round and just winging it and just building your team from, just with no plan at all. This helps you stay organized and focused. You're keeping on top of the bye weeks, and everything's going to be that much more successful, especially when you're getting down to round 13, 14. That you still need a 5th wide receiver or a 2nd tight end. And I always tell people, look, don't even worry about your kicker or your defense until the final 2 rounds. Some of you are forced to pick, 2 kickers or 2 defenses. Fine. So you get your 2 kickers in the final last round, or your 2 defenses in the 2 rounds before that. I never go defenses or kickers, at any point until the final rounds, because you're going to start to see, for example, patterns where, let's say, there's a whole bunch of red guys that have been taken, but there's a guy right here that's still available, and it gets to your turn and you're like, wow, I can't believe, Terrell Pryor is still available. I'm going to take that guy right there because it's an immense value for me to take him right here. And the good thing about this is my rankings don't echo the rankings that you're going to see on NFL.com or ESPN or whatever site you go to for your rankings. So everybody else in your league is going to be using different rankings than you. Sure, there's a lot of players that everybody agrees about, right? So pretty much everybody thinks David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell are the first two players off the board, or in the running back category. But it's really down in the middle areas and the end areas where I start to diverge from the rest of the folks, and I have different beliefs in who's more valuable. And this is going to help you again, because you're not going to just be relying on the rankings that you see on your website or the rankings that you saw in a magazine or you printed out. Again, with the magazines, I hate the magazines because they're printed, months in advance. So they don't know about, who's gotten injured or which, players have developed in the preseason games. So that's why my spreadsheet's so important. And people who have gotten my spreadsheet in the past know that every couple of days I'm sending out a new version, especially as we get closer and closer to the start of the NFL season. I'm sending out revisions, every other day, so that when it's time for you to draft, you have the latest, greatest rankings. So that's about it. I just wanted to sort of show you guys how I use the spreadsheet, how it works. I'm just going to go ahead and reset this, and we'll just take, for those of you who are interested, again, my website, www.fantasyfootballaddict.com, and hopefully I'm going to figure out in YouTube how to put links so you guys can figure out, how you can get the spreadsheet for me.